beyond the bony labyrinths. Podcast on music and philosophy by Lodewijk Muns. Episode 18, Melancholy 2, Consolation and Beauty. In the previous episode, the first on Music and Melancholy, I discussed two compositions by Emanuel Bach that contain in the title a self-reference to the composer. Bach's Empfindungen, Bach's Feelings, and Farewell to my Zilbermann Clavichord. You could therefore consider them musical ego documents. Both are also examples of a state of mind that could be labeled melancholic. Before these compositions by Emanuel Bach, there are few instances of a title in which the composer refers to himself in the first or third person. I know of only two, and they are both, not coincidentally, connected with melancholy. Not coincidentally, because melancholy is associated with an introspective, if not egocentric, state of mind. For the melancholic, contact with the outside world is mostly painful, and in everything that comes toward him or her, she reflects on her own feelings. I spoke of two instances. First, a Pavane by John Dowland, a lutenist and a contemporary of Shakespeare. The Pavane is a slow dance that was originally not especially associated with sadness, but took on this connotation partly thanks to Dowland's Pavanes. And Dowland compiled some of these under the title Lacrimae, Tears. In episode 15 I played a Pavane by Louis Couperin, which may count as exemplary of the melancholic Pavane. Dowland died in the year Couperin is believed to have been born, 1626. One of his Pavanes has as its title a Latin pun on his name, Semper Dowland, Semper Dolens, or Ever Dowland, Ever Grieving. I will play that Pavane, originally written for lute, on the piano. That Dowland labels himself as sad or melancholic in the title of this piece fits the context of his time. Melancholy, or adopting a melancholic attitude, is also a fashion that occurred in different varieties in different periods. And in England, around 1600, a melancholic attitude was considered a fashionable sign of intellectual or aesthetic sophistication, as the Oxford English Dictionary defines it. The second case of a self-reference in the title or caption of a composition is that of Johann Jacob Froberger. He was one of the most esteemed keyboard players and composers of the mid-17th century and an older contemporary of Louis Couperin. Froberger even left 3 compositions with such self-reference. These include a lamentation on the fact that I have been robbed and a lamentation to dispel melancholy. Here the self-reference is not explicit, but again, according to tradition, it is about the composer's own feelings, as he was again the victim of robbery and humiliation. In addition, there is a meditation on my future death, titled in French as Méditation faite sur ma mort future. This comes with an indication of place and date, Paris, 1st of May, 1660. The specific time and place is significant in this context. The here and now takes on a special meaning in the awareness of one's own mortality. Below the composition is written Memento Mori Freiburger. Unlike Emanuel Bach's Fantasia in F-sharp minor, Bach's Empfindungen, this meditation by Froberger does not seem to have been written in the immediate prospect of death. Froberger did not die until over 7 years later. But a reminder of transience and mortality, vanitas, was a common artistic theme. In painting it is symbolized with appropriate attributes, skulls, candles, wilted flowers, and also musical instruments, with or without broken strings. An instrument that is not made to sound is a dead object. And music, like any sound, is inherently ephemeral. Once it has faded away, there is no more music. For those receptive to it, all music can be a memento mori, a stimulus for melancholic thoughts. For convenience, I have so far spoken of melancholy as if it were a well-defined concept. But the state of dejection that Froberger tried to dissipate after being robbed yet again will presumably not correspond to what we nowadays call melancholic. It is a label that covers a great diversity. What medical authorities have called melancholia since ancient times and until about 1800, this melancholia was supposedly caused by black bile, melancholy, and related to a broad spectrum of disorders. This includes what is nowadays called depression. But it is unusual to refer to depression as melancholy. To melancholy you can surrender with a certain sense of well-being. To depression only in despair. Perhaps the more positive ring of that word, melancholy, could actually help put depression in a more favorable context, especially because of the rich cultural tradition associated with it. What melancholy means in the current, most common meaning of that word is aptly described by the Oxford English Dictionary as tender, sentimental, or reflective sadness, sadness giving rise to or considered as a subject for poetry, sentimental reflection, etc., or as a source of aesthetic pleasure. A non-acute sadness associated with artistic enjoyment. That meaning can be traced back to the early 17th century, the time of Dowland, alongside other meanings which place melancholy more in the realm of mental illness. At the same time, when melancholy was considered a sign of intellectual or aesthetic sophistication, it was also described as a malady, an epidemical disease that so often, so much crucifies the body and mind. The author of these words is Robert Burton, a contemporary of Dowland, a librarian and, as an arch melancholic, an expert by experience. He dissected the phenomenon in all its aspects in The Anatomy of Melancholy, a tome of some 800 pages. The milder form of melancholy, the tender, sentimental, or reflective sadness, has been called sweet melancholy, wistfulness rather than depression. Last time I quoted Daniel Schubart, who around 1785 speaks of the clavichord, the favorite keyboard instrument of the time, as that lonely, melancholic, inexpressibly lovely instrument. Melancholic and lovely are closely associated here. Even in this era, the later 18th century, melancholy is valued as a sign of a desirable sensitivity, of aesthetic refinement. Elsewhere, Schubart writes with characteristic excessive enthusiasm, "Sweet melancholy, languishing love, the pain of parting, the lisping of the soul with God, sultry premonitions, glimpses of paradise through a sudden breaking of the clouds, sweet dripping of tears, all this lies in the clavichord. Look, your clavichord breathes as softly as your own heart." That the heart does not breathe we should just ignore. Here too it is about sweet melancholy, süße Schwermut. This borders on nostalgia, Wehmut, and originally nostalgia too was more of a disease than a sweet and sour cocktail of feelings. Like nostalgia, melancholy tends towards looking backwards, reminiscing. It is accompanied by a sense of loss, but not acute, and by longing, the purpose of which can be vague. Music has been hailed as a cure for melancholy since ancient times. But the sweet variety does not require a cure. The melancholic person is less inclined to seek solace in cheerful music than in music that expresses his or her mood sympathetically. If music can serve as medicine for the melancholic person, then as a homeopathic remedy. Burton writes in his Anatomy of Melancholy, "Many men are melancholy by hearing music, but it is a pleasant melancholy that it causes. It is a most present remedy, it expels cares, alters grieved minds, and eases in an instant." If melancholy is a form of sadness, and melancholic music is sad music, why would we want to listen to it? The question is often asked. The answer, I think, is rather obvious. Merry music can be uplifting in certain circumstances, but it cannot take away sadness. And the denial of sadness, contradiction, cannot help the person in question. Homeopathic, melancholic music, on the other hand, offers comfort. Not by saying, cheer up, life has so much to offer, but rather, I too feel this sadness. The music we listen to is simultaneously like a listening ear, a sympathetic response to the listener's feelings. Comforting melancholic music is not music that expresses acute pain. It transcends the raw expression of pain because the emotions are milder, but mainly because of that which is called beauty. Beauty is a complex concept. There are many kinds of beauty, or manifold phenomena, to which the word applies, and perhaps they have little in common except the positive appreciation we give them. It is not just that melancholic, comforting music is usually considered beautiful. There is, conversely, also a widespread tendency to associate the concept of beauty and music precisely with melancholy in the sweet variety. It is not so much merry music that people think of first when asked about exemplary, beautiful music. Deep musical experiences are typically experiences of being moved. Being moved often involves melancholy of the sweet variety. In any case, there is a philosophical tradition that explicitly links the two, melancholy and musical beauty. The philosopher and conservative politician Edmund Burke wrote in 1757, "Great variety and quick transitions from one measure or tone to another are contrary to the genius of the beautiful in music. Such transitions often excite mirth or other sudden or tumultuous passions, but not that sinking, that melting, that languor which is the characteristical effect of the beautiful as it regards every sense. The passion excited by beauty is in fact nearer to a species of melancholy than to jollity and mirth. That sinking, that melting, that languor, that is the feeling that beauty provokes, according to Burke. In a footnote he quotes from Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice, "I am never merry when I hear sweet music." Emmanuel Bach's fantasias have moments of melting and sinking, but at least as many abrupt transitions, and thus fall outside the range of musical beauty as conceived by Burke. By contrast, Louis Couperin's Pavane can count as exemplarily beautiful and melancholic. We find the idea that musical beauty would be closely linked to melancholy a little later, more elaborated, in a French treatise entitled Poétique de la musique, Musical Poetics, by Bernard Germain, Comte de Lacépède. Born in 1756, this Lacépède was an exact contemporary of Mozart, but he lived a lot longer. He was a remarkable figure who is mainly known as a naturalist, but he was also a politician and an amateur composer. His oeuvre included 4 operas, but none of his compositions has survived. Like many contemporaries in the later 18th century, Lacépède tends to explain what he considers the essence of music with speculations about its origins. What music is, essentially, is determined by how it originated. That may sound plausible, but it is not at all certain that music cannot have undergone radical changes in how it is made and how it is used. From a present-day perspective, it is not so interesting whether such speculations are sound, scientifically and philosophically. They usually are not. But how they try to psychologically underpin a particular conception of music. Music, Lacépède argues, had its origins in spontaneous emotions expressed with the voice. Feelings of pleasure and cheerfulness gave rise to dance songs. But it is to sorrow and sad melancholy that we owe true music, that animated image of all passions and especially of the deepest. It engraves them so strongly and ignites them so quickly in our souls. It makes tears flow so deliciously. It gives such sweet emotions and such intimate pleasures to all sensitive souls who have experienced or are experiencing misfortune. And therefore, alas, to all those who have received the precious and fateful gift of sensibility. Lacépède's enthusiasm is similar to Schubert's. It is the glorification of sensibility, sensibilité. According to Lacépède, the origin of music, of true music, lies in the lament of a man who has lost his companion. A primal Orpheus who has lost his Euridice, one might think. The theories of French philosophers on the origin of music are often reminiscent of opera. Orfeo in Gluck's opera. Gluck is a contemporary much discussed and admired by Lacépède. This opera, Orpheus, soon, all too soon in fact, manages to sublimate his grief and despair over the loss of Euridice into an extremely controlled, slightly melancholy song. His melancholy transcends acute pain. Melancholy, Lacépède argues, is essential to our humanity. As a thinking being, man cannot simply be happy. Man's usual state is not that of enjoying pure and unadulterated happiness. He has only during brief moments tasted this joy. The faculty of thought, this sublime gift that we have received from nature's author, the cause of our true pleasures, but at the same time the principal source of all our sorrows, this faculty of thought will soon disturb this untainted happiness. The happiest man escapes all these fears only to indulge in a secret melancholy. All the happiness to which you are destined by nature is therefore only this melancholic state, where in truth our suffering is all of the mind, but no less real. Herein, then, we find the explanation why the melancholic person is less inclined to seek solace in upbeat music than in music that expresses his or her mood in a sympathetic way. Music that can act as a listening ear, a sympathetic response. According to Lacépède, when his art seduces and captivates, It is a friend, unhappy like us, whom we seek to be consoled and to lay in his bosom the burden that weighs us down. We recognize ourselves in the features that he offers us, and the sweetest sympathy unites us. Whoever we are, and whatever misfortune we have experienced, he appears to say to us, I too have felt it, and I too bear the sad marks. Thus Lacépède. This musical I is not someone. The friend Lacépède mentions is a conception that never takes any shape, of which we are rarely aware. It is remarkable how in music we can accept what I've previously called a free-floating feeling, a feeling that the listener can recognize and share, and which thus becomes anchored in his or her own soul life. That cheerful, energetic music would be less true than melancholic music, that is not a tenable assertion. And yet it seems to me that Lacépède's observations have a certain relevance that is perhaps even greater today than at the time, 2.5 centuries ago. Lacépède places feelings of happiness against the permanent background of grief for loss. If we interpret that concept of loss broadly, it can be loss of all kinds, personal circumstances, much more broadly, loss of biodiversity, loss of culture, in general, loss of space for optimism. Even in unlikely best-case scenarios, we live in a global and permanent catastrophe. The experience of beauty will then be inextricably linked to melancholy, to a form of, at best, controlled grief. This was episode 18 of Beyond the Bony Labyrinths.